CMMS Radio talks about all things CMMS, computerized maintenance management software, focused on maintenance management. It's the people, the process, and the culture that make your CMMS journey a success.
Getting to the second theme with the role of automation, and you shared like some important insights. So before I go back to Jim, it's one reflection as well. So we do have, from a broader perspective, all kinds of areas to look into sustainability. In my previous job inside Schneider, I was running the line of business where we do R&D and trying to get our own products more sustainable. So we are all about, let's get the cardboard, let's get a smaller PCB, let's measure every single watt that we consume here. So when we multiply by thousands and thousands, that adds up, right, and helps. So that was one approach. But also there's the discussion about the energy that we consume and a lot of debates around the supply side and sometimes a bit of intense debate if we should move from fossil fuels to renewables or not and etc. And people often forget the demand side, right? And that's where technology helps. Because I like to say, the greenest energy is the one that you don't use. Right? So we can debate a lot about, well, let's put solar, let's put wind, and let's get out of coal, and etc. But just by being more efficient, day by day, piece by piece, you get so much into your sustainability journey. And I just want to get your thoughts, Jim, because you start by saying, we should call it smart manufacturing. And I guess that's connected to the technology side of it and tackling the demand problem, right? So what do you think?
Well, I can't resist making one comment on when we were starting smart manufacturing up. It came through a workshop in 2006, and the concept that came on the table was smart plant. And I already told you how we got the name smart manufacturing. Unbeknownst to us, Germany had started up on something called smart factory in 2005, and they rebranded. They started, and they called it Smart Factory, they rebranded it Industry 4.0. And everyone's heard about Industry 4.0. We didn't know about it at the time, but they're actually really quite the same, but the approaches are very, very different. One of the things that we are spending a great deal of time on from a smart manufacturing standpoint is how do you free up the data, how do you get at this data? And we'll get into the AI in a bit, but if you really think about it, the tools that are on the table right now make it so easy to put a bad model together, it's not even funny. And there's so many bad models out there. Just think about some problem in my plant when all my data, when my plant is running 99.9% normal. You've got to get the right data in order to build this. And we run into this over and over again. It's so easy to build an AI model that looks like it's running well, and the moment you start using it, it's not going to work. And then you've got to think about, we call it the life cycle of the data. So you collect this raw data, it's messy data, it really is messy. And so you have to clean it up, you have to understand the quality, you have to fill in missing data, you have to contextualize it, you have to clean it up, you have to normalize it, you have to scale it. And all of these kinds of things become very, very important to get the data put in right. And so one of the things I think I'm trying to address a question that, actually I'm more reinforcing what's being said. You got to get started on thinking and understanding how you do this within your plant sites. So bite-sized chunks, we call it data first. Start building up your capacity to do a data first strategy and grow it from there. Don't try and solve the world straight out. And we will argue that you have to get that in place. The factories, the lines need to be up and running with the right data going forward as you build these models, these digital twins, in whatever form they take. But it can't stop there, which I think, Andre, is where you're going. When you get into supply chains, we're very transactional right now. Why can't we be more interoperable? That's a data exchange kind of problem. Everyone's talking about resilient supply chains. What does that mean? You have to have more visibility on the material flows, the material capacity, the factory capacities in a much more open manner. That's a data question that the industry needs to face. But we have to get there to get at these really significant benefits that are still yet to, shall we say, be achieved.
We're selling more products, so we need people to manage that whole supply chain. Another point in there is that it does help retain people. I mentioned, the job interview where the person was attracted to join Schneider because we're a sustainable company, and because we're digital, and because we're thinking of things, and that does attract the next generation. It absolutely does. There's also an element of Industry 5, and not a lot of people have heard, but we're now past Industry 4, and we're on Industry 5. And Industry 5 is sort of the overlay of society on Industry 4. How companies need to start looking at how they benefit society and how they benefit the countries that they're working in. And that gets right into, the idea of circularity and sustainability outside of the organization into the supply chain, and how we work together. And ideas like you buy a fridge from Samsung in 5 years, it quits working because that's what Samsung fridges do, apparently. And we should have more responsibility for that product for its life cycle. And we should be looking at, well, what do we do with that fridge? And that fridge should go back and be part of a program to reuse those parts. And that's all part of Industry 5. And that's part of looking at our world differently and looking at it from a perspective of what impact we have on our world, and taking that into the company, in the case of Schneider, into our company, and making it an important part of the conversation on an ongoing basis. Like, how do we impact? How can we reduce our impact? And where we have to make impact, well, we need a lot of copper. So we should be looking at what happens with that copper after it's in a piece of hardware that we send out to a customer. There needs to be that loop back and that perspective more and more. So I think it absolutely, as the younger generation comes and looks for jobs, they want to work for companies that have that perspective. And they don't want to do the same work. And to Andre's point, we don't even have the numbers to fill the factories. Like, it's just very obvious that there's no way we can fill the factories with people. We need automation. We need to think this way. So absolutely.
Yep. And
reach a little bit further. And so when you think about that, our sustainable vision that we had 20 years ago when we started, and how we've digitally transformed and how we've become more sustainable, our targets are way past that, obviously. And so every year we're trying to improve and understand, well, what can we do next? And that it's something I'm proud of, is the fact that we've maintained that #1 status, even though our targets are changing year over year.
Right. Any thoughts, Jim? And also, I think it does an angle beyond the factories and the supply chain to explore, right?
A couple thoughts come to mind, just think about, Greg, what you're talking about. One is, we'll have to, before the end of this session, get into why this is hard. I mean, one of the things that we can see is that the potential of this is very, very high. But why is it so slow? Why is the acceleration still slow? We'll have to get into that. But one of the reasons, and the reason I opened with my little introduction on the internet, is that when we were doing this before the first browser in 1995, we couldn't get enough of the right data. We just couldn't get it. And so you weren't making any progress. When the internet came in, we didn't know how to get the data or how to use the internet. So we had to kind of figure that out, but we got better. And so we were able to start making some progress. When cyber infrastructure came in, which was the precursor to cloud, we started putting a lot of stuff in the cloud, and things started getting more and more compartmentalized as things have gone forward. And we're asking really hard questions now about, how do I get access to enough of the right data? And getting the right data to do this is very, very hard. And we'll get into that a little bit more. But from a sustainability standpoint, just to kind of riff on what you're talking about, I like to think about a box around your factory. And there's several things you can do from a sustainability standpoint. There's stuff going into your factory, and what you can do is change the materials going in and make those more sustainable or environmental friendly. So one example for us is cement. So we've worked and done quite a few models on kilns, how to reduce the energy and so forth, how to control them and so forth. But now they have the opportunity to move into some low carbon clays. And so what we're doing is now how can you work with the data? How can you rejigger these models and the way to manage and control these kilns in ways to take on this different material? That's a good thing to do from a carbon, and it has an economic benefit. If you go inside the factory, right, I use the terms production, precision, and performance. And there's lots of examples. So steam methane reformer, there's 1,000 giant furnaces around the world, and they use a huge amount of energy. What we did with our particular project is if you just level set the temperature in a giant furnace so that you can raise it, get rid of the distortions in the temperature, you can raise the efficiency significantly and up the productivity and the use of the energy. And if you do it on one furnace, great. But what if you could do it on 30 furnaces in a much, much easier manner? General Dynamics out in Scranton, Pennsylvania makes a lot of metal products, forging, heat treatment, and then machining. They were spending a lot of time on the machining side because the specs were going out on the forging part of this thing. So just putting some sensors on this and managing the spec on the forging process actually saved a lot of energy on the machining side. And oh, by the way, they found they were spending an awful lot of money on the heat treatment, which they didn't need to do. And one other one, I want to just give you an example of a small company. New York Confectioners makes nutrition bars, and they have this little conveyor belt. It's 30 employees. They put the bars on the conveyor, roll it through a cooling portion of this thing. They didn't have any temperature sensors on this at all, and we're running this thing. Put some temperature sensors on it, and they found out that, oh, my refrigeration mechanism was cycling over and over again. Something had been installed wrong, and oh, by the way, they could raise the temperature because they were cooling it way more than they needed to. And so they saved about 15% energy, and the economics were tremendous. Example after example like this, but you have to have the data, and you have to be able to get at the data, and I know we'll get into that a little bit more. If I complete the story, one last thing. If you go outside of the box, now what can you do? There's a whole set of things like if you have food products, what about shelf life? So you get this demand dynamic thing. So the better you can manage what's going on in the box, going in and out, and how you're producing it, has a tremendous amount of savings from a waste standpoint. And then Schneider are the experts on this. You can get into supply chain effects. We see about 12 to 15% economic benefit on the supply chain side on top of what you can do on the factory side. And if you start taking the supply chain and start to close the loop, getting recycling going, the circularity, the circular economy and so forth, so much you can do when you start putting these things together. So I can go on for a long time, but you get the picture that there's a lot you can do if you have the right data.
Thank you, Jim.
Did you find this episode helpful? Please send us some feedback, suggest a topic, or ask a question. Reach out to CMMS Radio if you need a co-pilot on your CMMS project. Visit CMMSradio.com and use the What's on Your Mind link. Thank you for tuning in to CMMS Radio, your resource for all things CMMS from selection to implementation to help you make better choices, learn from industry experts, and have a successful CMMS journey.